Hi Void, I'm Merwin, and today I wanted to talk about the process I take to get a zero draft, from brainstorming to zero draft. And the reason I want to do this is because without all the other authors on this platform who showed their plotting process, I never would have been able to write my novel in the 6 months that it took me. And before you say, oh, well, 6 months isn't very fast, I know, but I have 3 kids and I only worked like an hour and a half a day, missing 2 to 3 days, sometimes a week, and I still got it done that fast. So I think if you had more time, you could get it done even faster. Before I get started, I would like to note the creators who really inspired this process. Abbie Emmons, who is probably the biggest resource on YouTube for writing advice. I actually suggest her videos in one of my steps, especially. There's Jessica Brody, who wrote Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and I suggest her videos for the last step in my novel. And even Katie Tastic, her breakdowns of the chapters to be super helpful. So if you prefer a guide that tells you how many chapters to go to, I will link their video down below as well. Now, at any point of this process, you could be like, this is enough for me to start writing my novel. I think that overplotting is definitely a thing that can happen to people who do not need to plot as much as me. I am somebody who does not like to be bad at things, which is not good because a first draft is just not going to be good. But if I plot good enough, having that bone structure is enough to get me through the slums and the hopelessness of the middle of the draft to the end of the draft. Okay, so all of my documents I'll put in a Google Drive that you should be able to download below. They're not quite templates, but you could just save them for quick references. Abbie actually has templates that you can get from her channel, so I would go get those if you're looking for something that you can fill out. This is just my references that I keep inside my Scrivener. Right here on the screen, maybe if you can see that, or if you download my documents below, you can see that I start with a brain dump. In the brain dump, I come up with everything I can think of about the story: world building, pieces of dialogue, characters, descriptions, things I probably won't use, just a flow of narrative to get the ideas coming, so that way I have a selection of things to choose from. For me, this is all about gathering resources that I'm going to put in my index brain dumping, which is my next tab. Now, if you hate just blindly writing because you don't want to have to organize that in the next step, you can go ahead and skip ahead to the organized brain dump. So the organized brain dump could be where you start if you would prefer to put your ideas into these different categories, or you can go through and sort your brain dump into these different subcategories: world building, characters, dialogue, places, descriptions, anything you want to include. Oh, tropes is a good one. You can add anything you want to this organized list. What you want to do is build an index. Now, this doesn't mean it has to be all things that you're going to use. In fact, I kind of suggest that it's not. Put anything you like, things you like about other stories. Let's say you like the one bed trope. Put that under the trope section. You're going to need inspiration to pull from. Let's say you like that scene from ACOTAR with the music under the mountain. You know what I'm talking about? Write it down, because when you get to that point in your story in the fun and games section of plotting, you're going to need these things, and I guarantee you that your version of that, by the time you get to that in your story, is going to be nothing like the original. So think of this as like a smoothie story mashup. That's an Abbie thing too. She does a smoothie story mix, and I highly recommend that. But for me, I'm building an index. You might even want to build a selection of names if you're writing a fantasy that all makes sense in your fantasy world. That way you can pull from it as it's coming up. All this stuff will just give you a thick resource to pull from when it comes to plotting, which will simply make that huge task a little bit easier. Now, bonus tip, I kind of recommend that you keep this document on your phone, even if it's in notes, because as you're going about your day and you're thinking about your story, or you're reading, or you're doing the dishes, you might come up with ideas that you want to add, and you can just be continuously filling up this index before you go on to the next section, or even while you are. Okay, so now we have to focus on our protagonist. So whether you have one or two, or you want to do the protagonist and the love interest, you can do as many or as few characters as you want with this. I highly recommend the protagonist. And I follow one of Abbie's videos on the enneagram and then on misbelief. These things are going to give your character so much depth that whenever you start plotting, it'll be far easier to see how they would respond to the plot points you're giving them. So plotting doesn't feel hard. You're not sitting there being like, well, I don't know what would happen. Well, if you know the person, you can kind of guess how they're going to respond easier. So let's put in the work to get this step done. I have those videos linked below and in the document that you can download, so that way you don't lose the links whenever you get to this portion. So name could be a filler, doesn't matter. Age, you can generalize. All these things can be changed. but the enneagram. So these are just like general personality types that you can choose. So once you have the enneagram picked, you have these positive and negative traits that can then give your character a lot of depth without a lot of work from you right out front. I do have an example character that has positive and negative traits for the challenger. So positive traits: confident, decisive, protective. Negative traits: domineering, distrustful, and hot-headed. So right there, that changes a lot of how I'm going to plot based on this character as my protagonist. The misbelief is kind of harder to figure out, but it's very important. Go watch Abbie's video about this, but it's generally what you want to get across in the story, the point you're trying to show, and it's what your character is going to be grappling with through the story. So if your misbelief is, I'm not deserving of love, then everything they do is going to reflect that they don't feel like they deserve love. And at the end of your story, in your resolution, you're going to flip that misbelief around to, I am worthy of love. And you want your character to feel that at the end to give you the correct character arc. You feel what I'm saying? Because at the midpoint, they're going to make another decision, and then you've got two other key little points that are going to make you have a nice character arc. Is that helping? We're not talking about this. We're talking about this. Okay, and then I have a voice section, which is just like little tips, things they might say. Like, let's say you have a character who always calls people darling. You can put that in there so that way whenever you're writing, you can quick reference that. Maybe they have a southern accent, so you can put that in there. Or they say y'all or ain't, whatever it is to give your characters a distinctive voice, especially if you've got multiple protagonists, will help you get that clearer in the first draft. Not necessary because language can be edited, throughout your second draft, but it is a tip that I like to use because it also helps me get in that headspace of that character. So once you have your misbelief and your character traits, you can move on to filling out this 3-act story structure. This is probably enough plotting for most people, I would say. It's just not quite enough for me. I will not be going over what all these different things mean, the opening scene, inciting incident, all of that, because I'm just not as qualified as some of these other teachers on YouTube. So I'm going to link Abbie's videos below because she actually has a video per point. So you could watch that and then plot out your point. In fact, that's how I suggest you do it because you never know what ideas you'll get listening to somebody else give you examples. Watching her videos might give you the insight of having somebody working with you, which really helped to motivate me. On my sheet, there is some information that will not be included in Abbie's videos, and that's because it's the sort of information I've gotten from other places that I need to remind myself of when I plot, such as the midpoint either being a false victory or false defeat, and then depending on that choice, whether the next few beats are an upward or downward path is something I tend to forget. If I don't have that written down, plotting gets kind of muddied for me from the end of Act 2 to like the beginning of Act 3. Okay, so let's say you've got this all filled out, and resolution being, oh, now I do deserve love, isn't enough for you to begin confidently writing. That's too abstract. Now we move on to the Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. So using our index, our 3-act story structure, and what we know about the protagonist, we're going to fill out the Save the Cat Writes a Novel beats. Now this is a lot more in-depth breakdown. It breaks it down scene by scene, so you can know exactly how much information you need to put in each scene. You don't want to bother breaking it up into chapters. This is going to end up being your 0 draft, so chapters will form whenever you draft one. There is a video by Jessica Brody, though I recommend buying her book as well, where she talks about each of these individual scenes, so I'm not going to break them down, though I will point out the key pieces of information that I think you need to remember. The opening image is going to be mirrored at the end of your story. The misbelief at the beginning, and then the real change at the end. So consider how you can mirror that. The closer these two scenes are, the more round your story is going to feel, and it will be satisfying to the reader. It doesn't have to be exact. It can be done in conversation and location, in whatever way you want to highlight the difference between the character at the beginning and the end. Another thing I want to say is that the scene amount, don't focus on it. It's a guideline to help you keep pacing. It's not a rule. If you want to add more scenes to one part, go ahead. Now, when I say write the scenes, I mean that you can copy information from your index over. So let's say your opening image, you type opening image scene 1, and you're just copying over descriptions of the house, of what she looks like, of the characters you want to introduce, of the empathy you want to create with the character. Or you could write the entire opening prose. Or you could very quickly describe the scene in a not writerly fashion at all. Blank walls, log cabin, ugly rug, whatever works for you. Whatever foreshadowing you need to slip in there, put it in that scene. then move on to the next scene and describe it the best way you can, copying and moving information that you want to put over there. Then work your way down the beats in this plug and play fashion, skipping where you're stuck and then coming back where you need to. You might find that you add something to the B storyline that you need to foreshadow in the setup. So you go back and you add stuff to the setup. Whatever you need to do from this zoomed out way to make your story cohesive. Now, if you have your misbelief, you can go ahead and fill out the end and work your way backwards that way. I find it useful both on the 3-act story structure plotting and the Save the Cat Writes a Novel to place the midpoint first, because the midpoint is going to tell you whether you're going up or down to the climax, and then whether the fun and games beats are going up and down as well. And speaking of fun and games beats, this is where you're going to deliver the promise of your book. So if you're writing a romantasy, add in your one bed trope, your knife to the throat trope. Whatever you promised on that blurb and that cover in your promos, you want in that fun and games section. Even if it's, like, it doesn't actually have to be fun. It could be your character in a haunted house. Whatever you promise that your reader is reading it for, you want to put here. It's the thickest point of Act 2 and one of the most important parts, and where you will get caught up if you don't have things. Now, it's a lot of scenes, so if you need to go to the end and write the end and then go back and add those, go ahead. If you find you're completing your beat sheet without filling those out, leave it. Just leave it, because when you start to write, more of those fun and games beats might just pop up, and if they don't, you still have a complete draft without them, and you can add them when you're done. Now, once this is filled out, whether it's 2,000 words or 45,000 words, it is a zero draft. And with it, you can use it as a guideline to work through your scenes and write draft 1. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's missing parts, you will have the full bone structure of a story that you can count on other people have used and you know works, which is a huge confidence booster, especially if it's your first time writing a novel. I use Scrivener, so I actually go and I copy, like, let's say I'm writing the opening scene 1, I'll copy everything I have written there and I'll throw it in the notes tab of Scrivener, and then I'll have that on the screen and then write my scene directly from those notes, so I can check off things I need to include, like internal thoughts, world building, political things, foreshadowing I might need to place. I can go back and edit the plotting to reflect those changes and never lose track of where I am. I also kind of recommend that you keep those quick tips of your character's personality traits on hand, even if you write them on an index card and like tape them to the side of your monitor or whatever, a note card. That way, whenever you're stuck, you can think, okay, my character's hot-headed, so how would they react to this? Oh, my character thinks they're unlovable. How would they react to this? All these things together, I hope, helps you make a cohesive or at least quicker draft. And I'm so thankful to every author who shared their process online that allowed me to Frankenstein this piece together. I think in my next video, I might use this process to come up with a plotline for a woman versus the void story, something with like a gross woman, maybe fantasy, and use like a generator to help me choose tropes and stuff. I think that would be fun, and it would distract me from my current novel, which it needs to sit and rest before I start draft 2. So anyway, I hope this helps. Take what you want, leave what you don't want. Check out the other creators below. They have so much information and resources they can share with you. And if you want everything I talked about today, just download it from the Google Drive link below. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe so that the void will push me out further into the ether. And until next time, bye-bye.